What happens when a CEO walks into one of his own diners, orders a meal, and discovers the heartbreaking truth about how his employees are treated? Mark Reynolds sat in his car, staring at the neon-lit diner through the windshield. He had built his restaurant chain from the ground up, starting with a single location 15 years ago. Now he had 12 diners spread across the state. Business was booming, but lately something felt off. Customer complaints had increased. Employee turnover was higher than ever. And yet, when he asked his regional managers, he got the same response: everything's fine. But Mark knew better. That's why he was here. Dressed in an old hoodie, jeans, and a trucker cap, Mark had made sure he looked nothing like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar business. He had never personally met most of the employees at this location. They wouldn't recognize him. To them, he was just another customer, and that's exactly what he needed. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The place was busy diners chatting over plates of pancakes, the smell of grilled burgers filling the air. A young waitress, no older than 22, rushed past him with a tray of food. She looked exhausted. Mark slid into a booth near the back. A moment later, a tall, middle-aged waitress with tired eyes and a forced smile approached. "Hey there, welcome in," she said, pulling out her notepad. "What can I get you?" Mark glanced at her name tag. "Linda." "I'll take the bacon cheeseburger and a coffee," he said, keeping his voice casual. Linda scribbled it down. "Fries with that?" "Yeah, sounds good." She nodded and walked off. Mark leaned back, watching the restaurant. The kitchen door swung open every few seconds, giving him glimpses of what was happening inside. The cooks looked stressed, moving frantically. He noticed the manager, his name tag reading Rick, standing near the counter, arms crossed, watching the employees work. Something about him seemed off. Linda returned with Mark's coffee, setting it down with a tired smile. "You been working here long?" Mark asked. She let out a small laugh. "Too long, 5 years. That's a long time." "You like it?" She hesitated. The forced smile faltered for a second before she nodded. Yeah, it's fine." Mark didn't believe her. Before he could say anything else, the kitchen door swung open again, and this time he heard something that made him freeze. A muffled sob. It was coming from inside. Mark turned his head, his stomach twisting. The voice was shaky, broken. Someone was crying. Then, a deep voice, sharp and irritated. "Get yourself together, Mia. I don't have time for this." Mark's jaw clenched. He glanced at Linda. She avoided his gaze as if she hadn't heard anything, but she had. Everyone had. Mark pushed his coffee aside and stood up. He walked toward the kitchen, slipping through the door before anyone could stop him. Inside, the heat from the stoves was overwhelming, the sizzling of food loud in his ears. And there, near the back, was a young waitress, maybe 19, wiping tears from her face. Rick, the manager, stood in front of her, arms crossed, scowling. "You think crying's gonna help?" he scoffed. "Table 4's still waiting on their drinks, and you're back here wasting time." I just needed a second," Mia stammered, voice shaking. "You don't get a second," Rick snapped. "You're here to work, not stand around feeling sorry for yourself." Mark felt his fingers curl into fists. Something inside him snapped. He stepped forward, his voice firm. "What the hell is going on here?" Rick turned, surprised to see a customer in the kitchen. "Who the hell are you?" Mark ignored the question. He looked at Mia. "You okay?" She sniffled, nodding quickly, but the fear in her eyes told him everything. Rick rolled his eyes. "She's fine. She just thinks she can take a break whenever she wants." Mark's blood boiled. He had come here expecting to find problems. He hadn't expected to find this. "Maybe you should treat your employees like human beings," Mark said, his voice low, controlled. Rick scoffed. "Look, buddy, you don't know how this place runs. I keep things in order. If I let one person slack off, the whole place falls apart." Mark took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He looked at Mia again. Do you need to go home? Her eyes widened. I can't. I need this job. Mark's heart clenched. Before he could say anything else, Rick let out a short laugh. All right, I've had enough of this. Get out of my kitchen. Mark didn't move. Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice. I don't know who you think you are, but you're not going to tell me how to run my restaurant. Mark stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. You're right, he said casually. I won't tell you how to run your restaurant, Rick smirked. Damn right, Mark's smile widened. Because it's my restaurant. Rick blinked. What? Mark took off his cap, letting them see his face fully. Silence fell over the kitchen. Mia's breath hitched. Linda, who had just stepped inside, gasped. Rick's face drained of color. Wait, you're Mark Reynolds, he said, voice calm but firm, owner of this entire chain. Rick stumbled back a step. I didn't know. Mark's smile disappeared. You didn't have to. You should have treated your employees with respect, no matter who was watching. Silence. Then Mark turned to Mia. Go take a break. I'll make sure you still have a job when you come back. Her lip quivered, and she nodded quickly before rushing to the back. Mark turned back to Rick, his expression unreadable. We need to talk. The kitchen was silent. Every employee had stopped what they were doing, their eyes shifting between Mark and Rick. The air was thick with tension. Mark crossed his arms, staring at the man who had just been humiliating one of his employees. Rick's confidence had vanished, his face now pale, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Office. Now, Mark said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Rick hesitated, but under Mark's unwavering gaze, he turned and walked toward the back. Mark followed, shutting the door behind him. The small office was cluttered papers stacked haphazardly on the desk, an old clock ticking loudly on the wall. Rick finally spoke, his voice nervous. Listen, Mr. Reynolds, I didn't know it was you. If I had, Mark cut him off. That's the problem, Rick. You shouldn't have to know I'm here to treat people with basic human decency. Rick swallowed hard. I was just trying to keep order. Mark's eyes narrowed. By berating employees until they break, do you think that's leadership? Rick sighed, rubbing his temples. You don't understand. These kids come in here thinking they can slack off. If I don't push them, they won't work. Mark let out a slow breath, keeping his anger in check. Mia wasn't slacking off, she was breaking down. There's a difference, Rick scoffed. Look, I run this place the way I see fit. The numbers are good, aren't they? Mark's jaw clenched. Are they? Rick hesitated. I've been getting complaints, Mark continued. Customers saying the service is slow, employees quitting left and right. I came here to see why, and now I know. Rick shifted nervously. Employees quit all the time in this industry, it's just how it is. Mark shook his head. Not like this. Not when they're being driven out by someone who thinks fear is a management strategy. Rick opened his mouth to argue, but Mark wasn't finished. You've been with this company for 6 years, Mark said. I trusted you to run this diner the way I would, and what I saw out there, that's not how I built this business. Rick clenched his fists. So what, you're gonna fire me? Mark studied him for a long moment. No, he finally said, not yet. Rick looked surprised. But things are going to change, Mark continued, starting today. And if you can't handle that, then you can walk out that door right now. Rick exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. And if I stay, Mark's expression hardened. Then you start treating people with respect. You learn what leadership actually means, and you earn back the trust you've broken. Rick was silent, his jaw tight. Mark didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door open behind him. Back in the kitchen, the employees were still tense, their movements cautious as they worked. Mia had returned, her face still red, but she stood straighter now. Mark stepped over to her. You doing okay? She nodded slowly. Yeah, thank you. He gave her a reassuring smile. You shouldn't have to thank me for expecting basic decency from a manager. Linda approached cautiously. Is he? Gone, Mark shook his head. No, I'm giving him a chance to fix this. But if he doesn't, he's out. Linda let out a breath. Honestly, I didn't think anyone would ever do anything about him, Mark frowned. Why didn't anyone say something? Linda hesitated. Because we didn't think it would matter. We thought this was just how things were. Mark's stomach twisted. Had his employees really believed he wouldn't care? That their struggles weren't important enough to be heard, that was on him. He took a deep breath. That changes now. Linda studied him for a moment, then nodded. Mark turned back to the rest of the employees. I'm not just here today. I'm going to be spending time at every location from now on. No more managers thinking they can get away with treating people like this. No more employees feeling like they're alone. A few of them exchanged glances, as if unsure whether to believe him. He understood. Trust wasn't given, it was earned. And he intended to earn it. Mark walked back onto the diner floor, his mind racing. The weight of what he had seen, what his employees had endured, settled on him like a heavy stone. He had built this company with the belief that it was different, that it was a place where people were valued. But somewhere along the way, he had lost touch. The dinner rush had slowed, and the employees moved with more ease now, though the tension hadn't fully lifted. Linda was refilling coffee at a nearby table, and Mia was taking an order from an older couple, her voice steadier than before. Mark knew what needed to happen next. He spotted Rick at the counter, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. The man had stayed, which meant he had at least some willingness to change. But Mark wasn't going to take his word for it, he needed action. Rick, Mark called, motioning him over. Rick hesitated before stepping forward. Mark kept his voice calm but firm. You and I are going to work the floor together for the rest of the night, Rick blinked. What? You heard me, Mark said. You're going to see firsthand what it's like to be on the other side of that authority you've been throwing around. You're going to serve tables, take orders, and deal with the stress the way your employees do every day. Rick's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He nodded once. Mark turned to Linda. Give him an apron. She raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. A few moments later, Rick stood awkwardly beside Mark, wearing a crisp, white apron over his dress shirt. The first table they approached was a family of 4, their plates nearly empty. Mark picked up a pitcher of water and poured refills as he spoke. Everything tasting okay? The father nodded. Yeah, it was great, just waiting on the check. Mark looked at Rick. Go ahead. Rick hesitated before pulling out a notepad. His voice was stilted. I'll, get that for you. Mark watched as Rick awkwardly wrote down the table number and walked toward the register. It was clear he wasn't used to this side of the business. For the next hour, Mark made Rick take orders, refill drinks, and interact with customers. The man fumbled more than once, spilling a glass of water, forgetting to write down a substitution. But something shifted as the minutes passed. He started listening, watching, understanding. At one point, Mia passed by with a heavy tray of food. Rick instinctively stepped aside, but Mark stopped him. Help her, he said simply. Rick hesitated, then reached out, steadying the tray as Mia carried it to the table. She looked at him in surprise, then gave a small nod of thanks. Mark noticed the way Rick's shoulders dropped slightly, the way the tension in his jaw loosened. By the end of the night, Rick was quieter, more aware. When the last customer left and the employees began cleaning up, Mark leaned against the counter, watching Rick wipe down a table. You see it now, don't you? Mark said. Rick didn't look up immediately. When he did, his expression was different, not defensive, not dismissive, just tired. Yeah, Rick admitted. I do, Mark nodded, satisfied. Good. Rick set down the rag and exhaled. I didn't realize how much they go through, how much pressure they are under. Mark studied him carefully. So what are you going to do about it? Rick hesitated, then straightened. I'm going to change, I have to. Mark held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. Then prove it. Rick swallowed hard and nodded back. As Mark turned to leave, he caught sight of Mia and Linda watching from the other side of the room. Mia gave him a small, grateful smile. Linda tilted her head, her expression unreadable, but there was something close to approval in her eyes. Mark walked out of the diner that night knowing one thing for certain. This wasn't just about fixing one location. It was about making sure he never let this happen again. The next morning, Mark was back at the diner before the sun had fully risen. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few employees starting their shifts. He stepped inside, the air still carrying the faint scent of last night's service coffee, bacon, and something slightly burnt. The place was quieter now, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous evening. Linda was behind the counter, setting up for the morning rush. She glanced up as he entered, her expression a mix of curiosity and something else, cautious optimism, maybe. "Didn't think you'd be back this soon," she said, wiping down the counter. Mark slid onto a stool. "Told you things were going to change." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Guess we'll see." A few minutes later, Rick walked in. His posture was different, less rigid, more subdued. He spotted Mark and hesitated before making his way over. "Morning." Mark motioned to the stool beside him. "Sit." Rick obeyed, his hands clasped together on the counter. Linda poured him a cup of coffee without a word, then went back to her tasks. Mark didn't waste time. "I meant what I said last night. This isn't just about you, it's about making sure this place is somewhere people actually want to work. That starts today." Rick nodded slowly, his fingers tapping against the coffee cup. "What do you want me to do?" Mark leaned forward. "First, you're going to meet with every employee, one-on-one. You're going to listen, not just talk. Find out what they need, what's been driving them away, and actually do something about it." Rick exhaled through his nose. "All right. Second," Mark continued, "we're changing how this place runs. Fair scheduling, breaks that actually happen, and no more treating people like they're disposable." Rick looked down at his coffee. "I get it." Mark wasn't done. "You don't just get it, Rick. You have to live it, because if I hear even one more complaint about how you treat people, you're out." Rick met his gaze. There wasn't defiance there anymore, just understanding. "I won't let it happen again," he said quietly. Mark studied him, then nodded. The morning shift started filtering in, and Mark watched as Rick, for the first time, actually engaged with them. He asked Mia if she was feeling better. He thanked the cooks as they fired up the grills. It was small, but it was a start. By midday, Mark was in the back office making phone calls. He wasn't just fixing this diner, he was overhauling the entire company. He scheduled surprise visits to other locations, set up an anonymous employee feedback system, and ensured every manager knew that the days of unchecked power were over. The real test came a few days later. Mark returned during the dinner rush, slipping into a booth unnoticed. This time, he wasn't there to intervene, he was there to observe. Rick moved through the restaurant with purpose, stepping in to help when things got hectic. He checked in on employees, diffused tense moments with customers, and most importantly, didn't raise his voice once. When Mia walked by his table, she hesitated. Then, with a small but genuine smile, she said, "Thanks for coming back." Mark nodded. "Always." As he watched the diner run smoother than it had in years, he realized something. He hadn't just come here to fix a problem. He had come here to remember why he had started this business in the first place, and he wasn't going to forget again. Mark sat in his office, the weight of the last few weeks settling in. The diner had seen real changes, not just surface-level fixes, but deep, structural ones. Employee morale had improved, customer complaints had dropped, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly leading his company again. But there was still more to do. He had spent the past few days traveling to different locations, sitting in on shifts, talking to employees directly. The patterns were clear. Some managers were thriving under the new expectations, while others struggled to adapt. And a few had no intention of changing at all. One of those locations was only an hour away, a diner that had been one of the company's best-performing spots on paper. But the whispers from the employees told a different story. Mark had seen the warning signs before: high turnover, low engagement, and managers who only cared about numbers. So he did what had worked before. He showed up unannounced. The moment he walked in, he felt the difference. The tension was thick, the employees moving with a forced urgency that wasn't natural. Conversations were short, interactions stiff. He recognized that kind of environment. Immediately, people weren't working hard because they wanted to. They were working hard because they were afraid. Mark took a seat at the counter, letting the scene unfold around him. The manager, a man named Greg, stood near the kitchen, watching over the employees with an expression that was anything but encouraging. When one of the servers dropped a glass, Greg's reaction was immediate: a sharp glare, a clipped, biting remark that left the server scrambling to clean up the mess. Mark had seen enough. He stood, walking straight toward Greg. "Let's talk." Greg turned, caught off guard. "I'm in the middle of now." Greg hesitated, but the authority in Mark's voice left no room for argument. They moved to the back office, where Mark shut the door behind them. "You know who I am," Mark said, keeping his voice even. Greg nodded, arms crossed. "Of course. Then you know why I'm here." Greg's jaw tightened. "I run a tight operation. Numbers don't lie. This location is one of the best we have." Mark leaned against the desk. "Numbers don't tell me why your employees are miserable," Greg scoffed. "They're not miserable. They just know I expect results." Mark's eyes didn't waver. "There's a difference between high expectations and fear. I've seen how you talk to them, how you look at them. They're not working hard because they respect you, Greg. They're working hard because they're scared of you." Greg let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "This business isn't about making friends, it's about efficiency. About making sure things get done." Mark's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "And yet, in the past year, you've lost more employees than any other location. You think that's efficiency? Or is it just people escaping a toxic environment?" Greg's expression darkened. "I do what I have to do." Mark nodded slowly, pushing off the desk. "So do I." Greg tensed. "You're done here," Mark said simply. For the first time, Greg looked truly shaken. "Wait," Mark didn't let him finish. "I gave Rick a second chance because he was willing to change. You don't even think you're the problem." Greg's hands clenched at his sides. "You're making a mistake." Mark shook his head. "No. The mistake was letting this go on for as long as it did." He opened the office door. "Collect your things." Greg stood there for a long moment, as if waiting for Mark to reconsider. But Mark didn't waver. Eventually, Greg exhaled sharply, grabbing his coat from the chair. He walked out without another word. Mark stepped back onto the diner floor, where the employees had clearly overheard enough to know what had just happened. There was no celebration, no immediate shift in atmosphere, just quiet shock. Mark addressed them directly. "Greg won't be coming back, and things are going to change, starting now." A few of them exchanged looks, hesitant. Mark knew trust wouldn't be built overnight. But he wasn't here for quick fixes. He was here to make sure no one else had to endure what these employees had gone through. And he wasn't stopping until every location reflected the company he had set out to build.